Hi, folks. So I'm here to talk about the next unit. Really excited about this unit because this is the lit unit, or kind of the first major fiction unit. Sorry, in the curriculum this year. So we're going to be looking at character and conflict, the power of the moment, and this is a 25-day unit. So I think the first decision a PLC has to make is how you want to attack this unit, because the overview says that we can use a novel or a drama, so a major work, or short stories. And that novel and drama can be whole class, or you could do choice, um, or you could do short stories. And you could do short stories whole class, or you could do short stories choice, right? Because all the teaks in these are going to be essentially the same. Now, I try to contact a lot of people to get some feedback on which way was the best way to go. A lot of the level leaders that reach out to me all the time, I kind of weighed them in and said, how should we do this? And most of them said that they were probably going to do a short story unit because the physical task of getting books, like, every kid getting the same novel is difficult when a lot of your kids aren't coming to school. You haven't even seen some of your kids this year. And, if a kid gets behind in a short story, it's easier to catch them up or give them a new short story to assess with rather than catch them up with a novel. If a kid comes in halfway, three-quarters of the way through a novel and starts asking for work, it's much harder to catch them up on what's going on. So for that reason, I designed this unit around short stories. But please, if your PLC wants to do a whole work, that's fine as well. I think you're going to see that, the assessments that I've given you are going to help you either way you go. Okay. So we're really looking at character and theme in here. We want to see how writers develop complex and believable characters, including archetypes. And we're going to get to that more in a minute. So we're looking at complex and believable characters, including archetypes. And we want to look at how pivotal scenes, isolated scenes, contribute to the plot and theme of a work. So how is this specific scene developing plot, and how is it leading to theme? Okay. So those are the two major things we're looking for in this. So it is a reading unit, but it's also a writing unit, just like all our other units so far. So your kids want to get some practice reading or answering with smart text evidence, relevant text evidence, appropriate text evidence, and also some meaningful commentary as much as possible. And they want to be able to workshop those. So your kids have been doing reading analysis, right, their whole lives, analyzing character, plot, theme since elementary school. And they're going to get an opportunity to do the reading side of that specifically, but also the writing side of that. And we'll look at that in a sec. So this is it. These are the three teaks we're working on here. How do writers or authors develop complex and believable characters, including archetypes, through historical and cultural settings and events? So, like, how are all the different ways this is happening, and how are they? Um, what makes them complex? What makes them believable? How are the archetypes playing into that? And then isolated scenes, and how do they develop plot and theme? And the last thing is the writing piece. Develop and engage a literary analysis with an effective organizing structure that includes specific text evidence and commentary. So, what does that mean in pandemic times? Glad you asked. Let's look. All right. So, for the reading summative, I pulled a passage from The Kite Runner, in which Amir and his father Baba are talking about religion and whether it's not it's okay for his dad to drink a little alcohol after a party, and they have this great conversation about Baba's dad, sorry, Baba says there's only one sin and everything else is a derivative of that sin. It's a really beautiful moment between father and son, but it's really complex because they don't have the closest relationship. And the writer in the scene goes through all of that, like Baba and his dad and their relationship and all those things. Um, so the first two questions here look a little bit different than the ones we've been doing so far. In paragraph 13, why is Amir motivated to listen to his dad? And then what does paragraph 16 reveal about Baba? So I did this for two reasons. One, this are like sentence stems pulled directly from Star. And I thought, since we're getting closer to Star, it might be helpful to do that. A lot of times the Star test has kids do close reading, like in this specific paragraph, what do you notice? What does it reveal? And then it zooms out. What's the tone of this piece, or what's the theme of this piece, or what do you know about this character as a whole? So I thought it'd be nice to mimic that and practice that on this. So this isn't multiple choice, but because it's such a specific paragraph and such a specific scene, there are going to be a finite amount of real answers. Very much so, more than the short answer gives a kid more wiggle room. But I thought these three questions would prepare kids more for STAR, get them used to reading for specific details, and also scaffold nicely into the bigger questions that really get to the heart of the TEKS, which are 4, 5, and 6. So find evidence of mirroring being a complex believable character. Use text evidence and commentary to support your thinking. What archetypes is Bob mostly like? Use text evidence and commentary to support their thinking. And then what are some thematic ideas in the text? Use text evidence and commentaries to show the thinking. So I didn't put the theme because the kids are doing a cold read of a text from one scene from a text. So they may not know the whole theme. So just thematic topics. So they might say family, they might say faith. Um, they talk a little bit about their mom's death. They might say death, but I think they'd have to do a lot of work on there and to really make down work. Relationships between father and son, all those kinds of things. Rules that are in kind of like what their dad thinks about rules versus what they really are in society. Those are things we're looking for. And then complex and believable characters. So when we're looking at complex and believable characters, we're looking for something that takes them beyond an archetype, just the classic definition of the archetype, that narrow lane. We're looking for things that are contrasting. So in this setting, Baba acts a certain way, but in this setting, he acts a different way. Or flaws, right? What makes the character not perfect? These are all different ways to kind of look and attack complex, believable characters. And your kids want to be able to show that complexity. So, for the archetype of Baba, a kid might say a caregiver, or he might say, I would say probably ruler. And he has these specific rules, and he tries to kind of dominate his kid with those. But he's also a caretaker, and either answer would be fine. And I'm actually hoping kids even say, "Yeah, but he's not this," right? And you'll see how the formative kind of sets them up for that. So, this isn't meant to be a gotcha. This is meant to be a critical thinking exercise where kids have to go back to the text to support their answer. Um, we don't want to get into the habit of like forcing pigeonholing kids into specific archetypes, and we'll get there in a second. Okay, and we're here. So one of the things that I was guilty of early on in my teaching career, and I think a lot of us do, is we say this character is this archetype, and we don't give them any wiggle room on that. And it's the archetype teaching is more of a like a matching or identification thing rather than an analyzing thing. And so what I'm hoping to happen is have a little bit more complex conversation with kids around that in this unit. So like some archetypes do not change throughout a text or a movie, right? That is true. They kind of stay that way, and when they do, they serve a purpose. I kind of even mentioned that here. Like when they don't change, it's usually to help teach, help, or test the protagonist or main character in some way, and that's going to lead to theme. Also, like a classic archetype that never gives in, a ruler who never gives in at the end of a text, usually might have a tragic fall right from grace and tragic ending because they were too harsh and they didn't realize until it was too late. So like when these archetypes stay the way they are, they're also meant to show certain themes, right? Some characters are a blend of archetypes. A lot of characters, most characters go beyond that archetype and they grow and they change over the course of a text. That's the other way a character is complex. They're growing over text, right? I know these are all things he knows, but just kind of reminders. So, the archetype piece is just meant to be a discussion with kids. Do you see an archetype here? Yes, no, why? And so I think it's perfectly okay if a kid says, well, it's more than one archetype, or I don't see this archetype because the character is also doing X, Y, and Z. But this is a list of 10 archetypes. You might teach different ones. And because, if you've been doing this for a while, English too, or archetypes in general, you might call them something a little different. Please feel free to teach the ones you're used to teaching, or teach the language. Like instead of hero, if you call it warrior, that's fine. I'm not saying you absolutely have to teach these, because the TEKS don't mention which archetypes you have to teach. It just mentions that we do have to teach character archetypes to our kids, right? And how they're functioning in the cultural and historical settings, and how they could be complex, believable characters or lead to theme. All these things, right? Those are the things we're after, not specific archetypes, and that these are tried and true in every case, and they are gospel, and characters cannot break them, right? That's the thing that we want to avoid. We want to make kids complex characters. And the more they're kind of debating whether or not a character is a certain archetype, the more they have to go back to the text, the more they have to think critically and defend their thinking. Um, and that's the richness, right? That's why we love the literature, and hopefully we got kids thinking like that too. So it's actually better to have them kind of debate it a little bit because they're going back to the text and they're having to think more critically. All right, so since this is a short story unit, I provided you with 10 short stories. A couple of them are, kind of big ones. The first two here on Common Lit, so maybe you've used them before, you've read them before. Um, and I left them here knowing from their Common Lit, just so you have some other resources that Common Lit has in terms of assessment. But a lot of the kids know how to look up those multiple choice questions, so I personally would stay away from them, but they're there for you if you decide to go to Common Lit. And then I got some stories that I just found on my own from a couple of websites that I really like. I've got a few texts, 2 or 3 from the new textbook, because I really hope at some point we can really get in that textbook and use some of those texts. Some of them are beautiful. They're awesome. And then I pulled Harrison Bergeron, and then The Possibility of Evil, which were in the old textbook and are really classic texts, right? And so, please use a mixture of any short story text you want to use. Or the novel or the drama. You're not beholden to these, but my hope was to bring in some ones that will really work for these specific texts in different ways, and hopefully also give you some new texts you hadn't taught before that would be engaging for kids. So I give a little summary so that you don't have to spend a lot of time reading all these texts, so they're brand new to you. You can kind of get a little sneak peek. And then I gave some classroom classroom use, like what it might be used for. There's a couple here that I think are maybe more pre-AP or AP. Lobsters is probably a little bit more pre-AP. There's a story called Belly of a Beast, where a beast eats this wife's husband, swallows him whole. And it's like, what? It's this crazy magical realism, but it's doing some cool stuff and doing some cool themes. But that one's hard to understand. Kids are like, what do you mean it just ate his husband? What does this mean? And the ending's kind of like left open, and you're like, I don't know. So, a little bit more complex. I give a rationale there, or classroom use to give some themes to help kids get to. But I thought it'd be really engaging for kids and kind of weird and kind of fun. So it's there. If it doesn't work for you, that's okay. Or if you don't think your kids will get it, you don't have to use it. But I thought it was fun. If you have any other short stories that work, please send them my way. I'd be happy to add them to this resource. But these are some ones that I thought would be helpful. And I didn't want to overwhelm. I didn't want to put like 30 or 40 stories here. Just some ones that I thought would really work for kids in these teaks. Okay, so the reading side of this is kind of, let's go back real quick. Sorry. The reading side of this should probably be a cold read. Okay. Text you guys haven't talked about. Maybe in order to break up the assessment because of how crazy time is, they read it the day before, or they can read it the day before in class or the night before. But you're not going to discuss it with your kids, right? And then they're going to answer these questions. And as you can see here, some of these questions are just bullets, right? Or sentence or phrases up here. Some of these do have evidence and commentary, but it's really broken up. These don't have to be complete sentences if you don't want them to be, as long as they're putting text evidence here and the commentary here, and you can gather that they understood the text, that's fine. This is not a writing test. This is a reading test. Did they understand it, right? So the writing side of things, you have 2 options, kind of like you did last time. I just put some short stories here that they can pull from. My hope is that the kids, if you're doing a short story unit, will have some choice. Like, hey, we read these 2, 3, or 4 short stories. There's one that the kid really liked. Let them write about that one. And if they do, then this is a short answer one. So they'd be answering these short answer questions over one of these short stories, just like they did for the reading summative. The difference here is they would be workshopping these answers, right? You'd be really working with these kids, either with peer feedback or your feedback, to make sure they have, in-depth short answer responses. They have great text evidence. They're thinking between paraphrasing and direct text evidence. And, you're working on the transition from the response to the commentary to the text evidence, all those things to make it the best short answer response possible, right? The building blocks for that paragraph. Okay, so you'd be workshopping these questions, but they're broken up, right? A kid can do kind of one at a time and work through it. The other one is an essay. So instead of having kind of these questions broken up, they're kind of thinking about these questions and then they're going to write a response based on what they notice in each text. And they're going to be working on the building blocks of an essay, right? They need an introduction with a thesis or a claim. They need a body of evidence that addresses the prompt and answers some or all of these questions. And they need a conclusion that talks about that wraps it all up. The effectiveness of the piece or some final analysis of the theme, something like that, right? So here they're not only workshopping the body of it like they are here. Here they're also workshopping for transitions from introduction to conclusion, having a great conclusion, having a great introduction, having a great thesis. This might be more of a pre-AP assignment, especially this year. Or you might want to give them one or two questions here to really workshop instead of all of them, more tailored. So it's a shorter essay or a more focused essay, right? But that's up to you guys. Or you can just kind of workshop the short answers. But I would say, you definitely want to give them a cold read with some questions like this so that you can assess how well they're going to do in a cold read situation, right? We want to know that kids can transfer the skills that we're teaching them to something they've never read before, whereas all the other short stories there in the unit are meant to work through that, right, and discuss together and help them along. Okay, because you can do either a short story unit or a novel unit, so that writing essay, if you wanted to do this over your novel or drama instead, that'd be fine. You could just put Lord of the Flies here, right, or Antigone, and they could do the exact same thing rather than the short stories. Perfectly fine. That's up to you guys. Because this unit can either be a short story unit or a major works unit, there are 2 unit calendars. They're on the same page. The short story unit's at the top, that calendar, and then the one's at the bottom. So the thinking is you kind of would do a short story together where you'd mentor and model these things. And then you get to short story 2. And maybe you would do all your formative assessments over this. So there's 3 questions: the complex believable character, the archetype, and then the isolated scene and how they go to theme. And then you would get them extra practice over the short stories, different short stories. You could reassess with that, or you could give choice here, or both. Or you could spread these assessments out over several short stories if you think a kid's really bored with one, or if that's the way you want to teach. That's perfectly fine. But you could definitely kind of go back to the same short story and have kids do this independently for assessment. All these choices are up to you guys as a PLC. But yeah, this is a 25-day unit, and this is maybe a way to do a short story. I asked a couple people, and they kind of thought over 25 days, reading 4 short stories would be possible and not crazy. Definitely think you can do 3 and maybe up to 5, but you guys decide what's best for your kids, obviously. Okay, and then for a major work, you got some points here. So 25% of the major work, 50%, 75%, and 100%. And I gave you about 4 or 5 days between each reading marker, including weekends, to get to that point. I know it's a 25-day unit, and the reason why it kind of stops at day 15 is because the next part is the workshopping of those writing responses and a chance to give the reading assessment. So that's kind of why it's done in 15 days. If you need to go to 25 or 20 for either of these, and then you only want to spend 5 days workshopping the writing analysis, I could see that working too. But I would say probably 15, 18, 20 days is what you want to do in the reading part before you kind of switch over to that writing part a little bit more closely. Okay. All right. This model lesson that I'm giving you is meaty. It's got 2 warm-ups, and each warm-up kind of deals with specific teaks. So first warm-up from the Karate Kid, or an extension, right? You may just go straight to the text and not use this as a warm-up. But, it's the archetype, character, Mr. Miyagi from the original Karate Kid. What's his relationship with Daniel? This is when you would introduce archetypes if you wanted to with this video. And then we go to Cobra Kai, right? Because that show definitely shows more complexity with a lot of the characters. They really go into them a lot more. And so we see Johnny's relationship with Miguel, whereas Mr. Miyagi really fits the kind of archetype of the sage very nicely, and the teacher to Daniel. Johnny's relationship with Miguel, have you seen Cobra Kai? He's a very complicated and flawed sage / mentor / sensei. And the scene explores that, how like Johnny needs Miguel as much as Miguel needs Johnny, and that he's flawed and he does these unorthodox things that may not be ethical, but he's still trying to do what's best for these kids, and then how that plot moves the thing forward. So it's kind of broken up into separate teaks. And then right here, we got a short story, Lather and Nothing Else by Hernando Tellez. And it's also broken up into 3 pieces. And I'll be having videos for all these. They're not up yet, but I'll do those definitely this week. So you can have those for direct teach models. And you can kind of break them up like this, or you can do it all together. And then for a possible formative, I have this story, Less Than 5 Miles From Home. And you could break it up like this, um, or you could do all the questions together. So one way to teach this would be to kind of teach all these things at once. Like you would spend 3 days or so over this story, Lather and Nothing Else, and then teach archetype with it, teach complex character with it, isolated scene and how it's going to theme. And then they would do the exact same thing with this other story, Less Than 5 Miles From Home, or any story that you want to do, right? The other way to do this is you could teach this first teak, um, archetypes, right? And then the kids would go and read this story or another story, and they would just work on the archetype question, and they would give you feedback. Then you would go to this one, complex character, and they would do the same thing in the other story. So, it's multiple readings of the story, which could go faster and might make quicker work. Either way is fine. Those are just some ways you might want to attack this piece. Okay. So with that in mind, I have all the formative assessment questions together on the overview, or on the curriculum resources document. And then I have them broken up by archetype, complex character, and isolated scene. And this one has the rubric all together. This one has the rubric broken up in 3 places. That way it's easier for you to decide, yeah, I want to give these questions to my students all at once after we've done a lot of teaching over a document together or a short story together. Or no, I want to kind of space this out and teach it over different texts, or teach it over the same text, but more slowly as I model different things. And then here is the literary analysis essay with the rubric, or the workshop short answer responses and the rubric, and the reading and the rubric. All right, so that's a breakdown of this. Once again, you have a lot of choice over how you want to do this. Do you want to do whole work, or do you want to do short stories? Do you want to do choice, or do everything kind of whole class? Do you want to do the literary analysis essay and workshop that, or just workshop some short answer responses? But hopefully, I gave you some avenues and some new thinking, or some things to think about, at least with complex believable character and archetypes and how they kind of work together. And I'm going to model that a little bit more in the videos that you'll get as soon as I'm done with that. But I wanted to give these resources to you now because I know you guys are planning, and then you can kind of get those as they come in. But yeah, that's the video. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know. And remember, you guys are the PLC. It's up to you guys to massage these to meet your student needs. But hopefully this gives you a nice place to start as we move into this new fiction unit.